And record.
All right. Well, once again, this is our wrap-up 2020 episode of Voices of Color. I want to remind folks that we are not affiliated or endorsed by SCA Inc., by Society for Creative Anachronism Inc. This is being live from live people who have lives outside of Gate. Tonight I'm coming again as Nina, and I'll have my co-hosts introduce themselves in a second. But we really want to talk about how 2021 was for us as co-hosts, some of the feedback that we received about the show, and really talking about 2021. But there's so much that we've had happen over this last, 6 months, that we really wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to kind of wrap it up, because honestly, I didn't know if we were going to continue to do the show. We had we'll get to that in a sec, but I want to introduce my co-hosts, or I'll let them introduce themselves. Jessica.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Gigi. That's Jessica, or that's Jessica. I don't know where on the screen for you she is. I'm Gigi, and I've been a co-host since we started back with, I think, we started with Jessica and I actually, but my first solo was Draven. And I'm so happy to have been able to embark on this journey with Nina. I've been in the SCA for, I've been playing really since 2010. And I'm a person of color, surprise. So that's kind of what I represent on this show, is my experiences, and I try to be as honest as I can about those. So thanks for having me again, Nina, and Jessica as well.
And I'm Jessica. I have benefited so much, and I can't wait to talk about kind of our experiences with this show. Nina, you were a rock star for putting this together. And Gigi, I have already showered you with all of my praise and love many times. But these two women are so important to me, and they have really helped get me through the last year. So I'm super excited for this show, and I'm super grateful to have even had the opportunity to be on it.
Welcome. I think it's important that we start where we end where we began. That was one of the things that I wanted to do, is really have a true look back, because a lot has happened, not only in these 6 months, but these last really kind of 2 years. And the show has brought to light a lot of issues that weren't really talked about before. And I really want to take a moment to reflect, and hopefully we'll have some audience participation, but really, this has become like a thing. So it's like something I never imagined. Looking back, I literally woke up one day and I had this idea. I was like, we need to get people of color talking about our experiences. It was like this little idea that has morphed into kind of this runaway train. When I started the show and when I reached out to Gigi and Jessica, I really didn't know what I was doing. One, I've never done any sort of podcast or blog or anything like that. Been on some of the panels, but really didn't know what I was doing. But I knew that there was something there, and that there could be something really special. And so I reached out to these wonderful ladies who decided to take the ride through my madness with me. Really just kind of go with the flow, because it has been a little bit of a roller coaster. I do want to do a shout out and a thank you to Ashoksi and my partner Lynn for getting this ready, encouraging me to move this forward, not only just for kind of helping move the technical aspects, but really saying this is needed and we want to support you and step back and help you pave that path. When I approached y'all, I was kind of like, so I have this thing. I want to give space for people of color to share their stories, because that can often be validating, and we don't always have enough affinity spaces, but also to hopefully teach some folks along the way. And it just went from there. I'm curious, when I approached y'all, well, approached via messaging, like, what were your thoughts? Because I felt like, I was like, they're going to think I'm crazy. They're going to say, Nina, you're taking on too much. This is just not the time. But what was, what was going through your head?
So I remember thinking, A, it was going to be awesome. And B, I was like, oh my God, the last thing I need is yet another commitment. like, no, I need to say no. But I am incredibly thrilled that I did not. I feel like this is such a needed space. And I feel like your idea really filled kind of this gap of space where people of color's voices have gone unheard for literal decades. We've had people here spanning kingdoms, spanning generations, and we have as many people as we've already booked. I think we've got like twice as many booked for next year. So it's clearly a space that people need. So I am glad that I did it. Although, again, when you first came to me, I was like, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's because yeah, you both of you have a lot on your plate. So I understand why you would feel that way, Jessica. But similar to Jessica, I also felt like that's a great idea, like that, and it's going to be great. So I don't know why you thought we would think you were crazy. I was like, you're a genius. This is a great thing that's needed, and you're going to fill a niche, and it's going to be positive for other people, especially people who are feeling like they're the only ones going through this stuff. Because a lot of us are really separated by like state lines and hundreds of miles. Sometimes we're the only person of color in our local group. And when we talk about the things we go through, we get the deer in headlights look. Like, what are you talking about? That doesn't go on here. So it's kind of like gaslighting a little bit. So to be able to reach out to those people and say, we see you, we want to know who you are, you're welcome. I just thought it was going to be great. Those were my first thoughts. And although sometimes during the year I was like, Nina, you're really good at talking to people, and I am, as someone who's neurodivergent, sometimes I need time to like collect my thoughts. So I was a little bit afraid that I wasn't going to be able to, assist you as much, but you honored me with offering co-host. I really am honored by the fact that you wanted to include me. And I hope I lived up to, your expectations.
Oh my gosh, just a little bit. For those watching, these two have been such a support to me over the past couple years. Not only in the SCA, but out of the SCA as well. I live in Oregon, which is like white, and it's hard to find affinity groups. And then I'm in, Salem, which is south of Portland, so it's even more difficult. And then add on being LGBTQ, and it's like minuscule. So, finding two people who really understand what being a person of color and the especially women of color experience was so helpful for me to keep moving forward. And the fact that you both are doing work for the SCA that touches my heart and that I'm passionate about, I couldn't have asked for better allies. And I really can't say enough about how much I appreciate both of you. And this show would not have happened without you both. I think what's great about both of you is how we do have our strengths and we play off of our strengths well, each other's strengths well. And also that it just feels like we're sitting talking in a living room. And I think that really is helpful to bringing out the authentic self. And that's really what this space is about. So hopefully our guests, and so I know some of them are watching, hopefully our guests felt the same way as well. Speaking of guests, we had some great guests this year. What was interesting was how many people started contacting me I like out of the blue, it was just hey, I have this little idea. What do y'all think? And then we just contact, and we filled up pretty quickly. We have a huge lineup for next year, which is really, really fantastic. And then just the audience. Yesterday I was looking at the audience kind of statistics on Facebook that they had, and we have a new viewer in Estonia. And I was like, wow, like we've surpassed. I was thinking, the show, sure, my friends, their friends will watch, but it went further than I ever anticipated. I wanted to give a little some statistics about the page, because it was really incredible how far it's gotten. Now, of course, I don't know really anything about Facebook statistics and how many likes and stuff you need to be popular or whatever. I don't know. That's not my thing. Like the likes, I don't care. I don't get it. Who knows? But we're over 600 viewers or 600 followers. We have the highest number in Portland, Oregon. Second is Salem. And then we have a lot from Canada. But in terms of countries, Australia, Germany, Sweden, Finland, UK, Ireland, Estonia, and Belgium all have followers or viewers or what have you. And I looked at that list and I was like, holy geez, like this is actually meaning something. I was thinking 30 people. I don't know what it's. Yeah, Gigi.
Can I just say, like, hey, Drakenwald. Like, it's so great that you guys are tuning in. And a lot of times when we think about spatial differences, right? Cultural differences because of our spatial distance. Maybe we would think people in Europe didn't, want to know how we felt or hear our experiences or support us in ways that we would support them. But look, what you're finding out is, no, it's a mutual respect. And I've been able to go to Pinzik and meet people from Lockack and Drakenwald, and they are wonderful people. And a lot of times when I am thinking about traveling to Europe after the pandemic, I'm like, I need to reach out and actually meet these people in person. Like, I want to see them in person again. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for the support.
It's fascinating. And realizing that this is important, knowing that it's important, but really being able to see that there are other countries that this has gone to has been just, I'm amazed every day at how many people we have and who's watching. The interesting thing is we seem to have the whitest audience is white women, at least according to Facebook. So, whatever, again, white women between the ages of 40 to 55, 53, which I did not anticipate. And I'm not sure why. I know that people are in a learning mode right now, especially with the lockdown and the availability of information, but I didn't see that one coming. I really didn't. And I think we've had an opportunity to hopefully get some information out that hasn't been available before. And who knows?
I'm a little bit surprised, like when you first said that, but maybe I should not have been, because some of the most supportive people that I've met in these spheres, whether it be the wider world of costuming, which I've gotten involved in during the pandemic, or just the known world, like I have a lot of people who happen to fall into that demographic that have been solid supporters of me, willing to listen, even if they didn't understand everything, willing to be supportive, willing to be real friends to me, and then allow me to return that favor by getting to know them and becoming friends with them and supporting them. So yeah, surprise, not surprise. Like, sorry, not sorry. Yeah, surprise, not surprise, actually.
Yeah. No, I agree with that one. And living again in Salem, Oregon, right? Most of my allies are going to be white, and I know some really incredible women. So I'm really happy to see that and see that we're pulling people in to this work. We'll talk a little bit later about expanding the show and getting more people of color involved, but that was just kind of the highlights that I wanted to share. Was just, I read those and I'm just like, what? Like, who would watch this? It's so weird, and I want to thank our viewers because this show, at least for me, has really energized me. It's something that I've looked forward to. It's something that has validated my experiences as a person of color, as a woman of color, LGBTQ. It really has been kind of a relief for me during the month when I think things are really hard. Like, being able to come here has been helpful. Yeah, thank you, viewers. It's been pretty amazing. I also wanted to thank all of our guests that we had this last year. Of course, I'm having trouble finding the list.
I want to read it.
No, go ahead.
So I want to read it because just like in preparation for this show, I was looking at, all the little thumbnails of the videos, and I got to, kind of go back and watch some of them, and just, it brought me so much joy to see our little faces in the boxes, So the ones I looked at were first, me and Jessica were first, or Jessica and I were first. And then we had Draven on. Tenosh was on, Kai, Amathula, Roberto, Adrian, and Seto. Those are the ones that that came up like immediately when you open the Voices of Color page and you scroll down, you can see all the little boxes. And I was like, oh. And I want to say thank you to you guys, because what Nina was saying earlier about, you come and you talk to us, you came and you talked to us kind of like it was like a little living room. But in actuality, it wasn't. You allowed yourself to come into this space and talk with us like it was a completely safe space, but we have an audience, and you knew that. So you were able to allow yourself to be vulnerable, and that takes a lot of courage. So thank you for that effort, getting to know us, talking with us, but also knowing that there was an audience, and you all really, really opened up so much. I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, I think it's pretty incredible, the moments of vulnerability that we've seen, and kind of the very emotional places that people have taken the conversations, because we desperately wanted to create a space where there was no need to perform, right? And I think that we did that, but at the same time, we do have to acknowledge that we are on a global stage. And so you can be real and you can be yourself, but there is still that element of, hey, this is a public space and we are talking to a lot of people, many of whom you don't know, and there's a comment section going. And I mean, it means so much that people were willing to walk into that space and be real about themselves and their experiences. Yeah, it was just really incredible. So yes, thank you so much to all of our guests who put themselves out there in that way. Seriously.
So can y'all still hear me?
We can. You're a little frozen. We can hear you.
Please ignore my double chin. Jeez. I'll keep talking until I get the picture.
You might need to like restart your video. It could be worse. You could be making some like crazy face.
Yeah, at least she's just, looking down. She's not like
looking down.
That would be horrible.
Every time my video freezes, it's always a like.
Yeah, it says it can't detect my camera, which is weird. Well, but let's keep going. And as I fool around with things, and if if I get lost and drop off, y'all are queens. You know what to do.
Honestly, it wouldn't be an episode of Voices of Color without at least some tech issues.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think the audience is used to this.
Bless you guys for having patience, because like I'm an old lady, like I can't even help her because I don't know what is going on. Jessica is our saving grace because she's one of the young people, you know.
I am not bringing an enormous amount to this table, honestly. I mean, I'm always like, you should turn it off and back on again and see how.
But that's what tech support will tell you to do too. So I will say that you bringing some experience in the tech side of it and actually teaching me, because I had never streamed right from Zoom to YouTube or to Facebook. I'd never had to add captions. Like I actually did learn a lot from you. So I got a little bit of my comfort zone.
Squad. No, I'm kidding.
So the next thing, our little agenda for the show is talking about our experiences as hosts. So Jessica, do you want to give a little bit of insight into what your experience was like as being, you know, a co-host of this show?
Sure. So like I said earlier, when Nina first approached me about this, I was very much like, no, not another thing. But because I really wanted to do it, and I have never made good choices, I was like, we're gonna do it. Most of the other time that I'm doing any like online like web show things, I'm teaching, or I'm in the role of the DEI officer. And that's a very kind of specific role. It's very much more about making yourself palatable, making things edible. So I'm explaining very basic concepts. I'm kind of, I'm gonna mute Nina for now. You can unmute yourself. But it's really about making sure that people are connecting with the material, right? And it can't really be about you. And especially, this is something that I touched on in an earlier episode, you kind of almost have to remove yourself from the material to some degree, because you're presenting topics that have a lot of emotional weight. And you need to be able to stay objective enough to be a good educator. So it was never helpful to kind of get so in my feelings about it that someone would say something and I would be like, wrong, don't. Like, I needed to be able to maintain enough to understand where they were coming from so that I could explain it, but still connect to it in a way that felt human and made it real for people. So that is such a balance. There's so much more there to talk about. And it's so interesting to be in that space and then to come here where I can just talk. And I'm not specifically trying to educate, and I'm not specifically trying to dilute concepts. And, you know, I might explain a term once in a while, but it's much more me. And I don't have to worry about kind of putting myself into that role. So this has been so good for me as far as that's concerned. And then getting to have deeper conversations with people that I only knew at a surface level before. I think most of our guests I'd had some passing interaction with, or I knew them pretty well. But we had never talked for 2 hours about the specificities of what being a person of color meant. For the most part, there were a couple where I was like, ha ha. But for the most part, it's been amazing to kind of hear people's perspectives, to learn more about the time before I was in the SCA, to learn more about kingdoms that I've never even been to. It's been really amazing. I can't really say enough good things about it. What about you?
Funny you should ask that, Jessica. Wow, this so as someone who is neurodivergent, right? I'm autistic. I am not good with off script. Like I'm pretty reserved when it comes to like taking in information, right? Because I have to think about, am I understanding it correctly? Am I getting all the cues, verbal and nonverbal? And so how do I want to respond, and how should I respond in a way that they're going to understand me? Because sometimes things make sense to me and not to the other person, right? So that takes time. So I am used to thinking and then speaking, and really only saying something when I have something profound to say and I've thought about it and chewed on it. But in this setting, I've actually, at first it was like scary to think that, I would have to come off the cuff and just say whatever comes to mind without thinking about it first, or, play off of you and Nina and the guest. And honestly, it was kind of liberating. And I'm glad that I took the leap, even though I was scared, because it taught me that, I can do this. This isn't that difficult. It may be a little uncomfortable, but as long as I can prepare to be uncomfortable for these 2 hours, then I feel like I'm ready for whatever happens and able to roll with it. So I feel like this has helped me, with personal development, as well as the gratification I've gotten from meeting more people, like you said, people that I may have known their names, but they live in kingdoms that I never even visit. So I've never been able to talk to them. It really opened up my friend group, right, in my community. And this show, as well as kind of my foray into, during the pandemic, into the broader costuming community, I think helped me understand even more so that I'm not alone in dealing with these common things like microaggressions and racial bias. It's one thing to notice discrepancies, right? And to know that this doesn't feel good and it's probably not okay, but I'm not going to say anything because no one else thinks there's anything wrong with it. So it's one thing to notice discrepancies in how you're treated versus how those with more privilege are treated. But it's another thing entirely when you're also surrounded by people who, like I said earlier, give you that deer in headlights look when you bring it up. Like, what are you talking about? That's not what's happening here. And you're like, it feels like that's what's happening here. Like, I'm uncomfortable. You're not uncomfortable. So it's a very lonely feeling. And I've talked about this before on the show. So to be here and meet people who are also discussing those same discrepancies that I've been told don't exist openly, honestly, and also discussing coping mechanisms, right? Strategies to not be angry about this all the time. To remind me to remember that some people are just doing the best they can. And I need to give them grace because I also want that grace. Invaluable. So these people have brought me into community, right? Instead of making me feel outside of it. And it has been a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I'm, again, grateful to have been a part of it and looking forward to next year.
Yeah, I do definitely super relate to the idea of finding community that kind of, I don't want to say reinforces, but there's a large amount of gaslighting when you are kind of the sole person of color in very homogeneously white spaces. And so there are times where I'll catch myself going, I mean, maybe it's me. Like, or as we often joke, right? Am I the drama? No. Am I the drama? And so it really helps to have somebody else there like, no, I see it. I felt that too. That was my read. Like, it's just really, I don't know, it's just really fulfilling. And it helps me not be so negative because I know that I'm not, pulling things out of the ether. Like and it happens to everyone, like in some capacity. But it's hard because these are concepts that I teach. And so there are times where I'm like, am I just so steeped in these concepts that I am seeing things where they're not? Or am I overreacting? Am I underreacting, right? Like, what is the proper way to respond to these things in the face of people telling me that they're not happening at all? So yeah, it's been really amazing talking to people who share stories that I'm like, yes. Like, I can't tell you how many times over the course of our first season, I was kind of like, absolutely, yes, that. Oh my gosh. And it was so exciting, not because it's a concept that, I'm excited about. Like, it's usually stuff that can be very difficult to deal with, but I'm so excited to find that I'm not misinterpreting. I'm so excited to find there's community there because, as Gigi said, there's coping mechanisms that I don't know about. There's ways of handling these things that I'm unfamiliar with. there's ways of addressing these things in public spaces that are productive and not as draining. So yes, that has been one really amazing thing to come out of this show. Nina, are you back?
Yes.
For the moment.
Can I give a definition of gaslighting, just in case someone in our audience does not know what we're talking about when we say that term? It's basically behavior that, or verbal like actions that make someone question their own reality, right? Someone who is making you doubt your own perceptions because they basically don't want to believe you, right? They're questioning you, they're making statements to the effect of, you can't be right about this thing. And so you're really doubting your own perceptions, your own reality. And when that happens, when you're talking about racial bias, it's really disconcerting because there's a certain amount of anger that comes with that, right? Because when you do go back and talk to people of color and you're like, that wasn't okay. So why didn't they listen to me when I said it? So it's not just the fact that someone's questioning you and you can brush it off. It's like it's an insidious thing that happens, and it really causes you to question who you are as a person and if your thoughts are okay and if you're okay, and it's not fun. It's not fun. But Jessica, do you have a better, I don't know if you have a better definition.
No, I think that's a pretty good definition. Mostly, I think most people have experienced it in some capacity. Gaslighting occurs pretty frequently when there's a power differential. So if anyone has ever kind of had that, like, but this is what happened, and someone's like, no, it didn't. And you're like, it's very hard to even talk about how to solve a problem that other people won't acknowledge exists. And that's at its core. I want to make sure Nina gets a chance to kind of talk about her perspective and whatnot. Nina, do you want to talk about like what it was like? Because you steered this whole thing. You were on every show, so.
Like I said before, it was a roller coaster. I want to put out there, one, I know we think they're guests, but just a reminder that they were all volunteers. I didn't know most of the people that we interviewed beforehand, or even the people for next year. Like this gave me an opportunity to meet people, across the nation. And given the fact that I'm an introvert, like this was a big deal for me because, Gigi, I heard you talking about stepping outside of your comfort zone. I had to do the same. I know folks watching this show may not see that I'm an introvert, but I was like, oh shit, I need to call someone. Oh my gosh. Okay. I need to drink some wine. Then I can do this. And then I'd get on the phone and I'm like, hey, what's up? And it would just go, right? Like, so I got to explore and grow myself, and then meet really, right? And then meet really cool people along the way. Gosh, some of our pre-interviews, I wish I had recorded, calling people. So for the audience, anytime before an episode, myself and whichever co-host could join me, we would do a pre-interview with the person who was coming on the show. Part of it is to find out what do they want to talk about, what's important to them. We also want to, because this is a space that we want people to feel comfortable in, and we know we can't guarantee a safe space, what are topics that are off limits, or that areas of people's lives that they want to keep private. And then we just kind of go over the gist of the show. And some of the moments in the pre-interviews were, I hate to say, but better than some of the interviews. We had every interview was great. Every episode was fantastic. Some stand out. Adrian's pre-interview stood out to me because of the amount of stories that he had. And I actually messaged him earlier and said, just to let you know, we're going to be talking about you on the show. So I do want to preface, I told him earlier. But some of the stories that folks told before in their pre-interviews were pretty amazing. there was Tenoch was very, we talked a lot about being LGBTQ and a person of color and the intersection of that, and how there often is an area for that. And by the way, we'll have a special episode, or we'll talk about special episodes in a bit, but there will be a special episode on intersections, and that's one of them. So Tenoch and I talked a lot about that. With Roberto, we talked a lot about the, because he worked with immigrants, and I'm a daughter of an immigrant, the immigrant experience. And that's something that didn't make its way into the show, but I got to know some really cool people along the way and hear some really cool stories that made me feel not so alone. And hopefully, you know, the guests and the people watching felt the same and got to have that sort of connection. But, you know, yeah, I didn't know most of the people. Seto, I knew by name. You know, who doesn't? But I didn't know Seto before this. I really, it was, you know, I asked Draven to be on the show because I really value some of the work that he and others are doing for Indigenous players and Native American, Alaskan Native players. And outside of that was a post on the Scadians of Color, and then people just said, sure. Are you sure you want me on there? Well, yeah, because everybody has an interesting story, right? I had some folks who are like, I'm not interesting. I'm like, I bet you are. And at the very least, your story is going to validate everyone who's watching it. And you know, while this show was, I did have the intentions of bringing people along and giving people a glimpse into an affinity space that they would otherwise not have access to. It really is a show for us by us. This is us shooting the shit over some drinks on my end, at least, and being real and talking about the things that are important to us and affect us on a daily level. We would have some comments, and I had some folks contact me after the shows and say how impactful it was. I had a lot of non-people of color, white people, white women in particular, contact me and say, like, this is something that I never knew, and get a hold of me, reach out on Facebook and just say, this has changed my life. And the way that I view things. And I think that is a happy byproduct. That's an important byproduct. Yeah. And I think that we all have a lot of memorable moments from the shows, and I definitely want to share some of those. Adrian, I know you're watching, and yes, I'm going to be talking about you. So hang in there and be sure to keep watching. Yeah, it was pretty great. I think so. We have a lot of people of color who are continued guests. I don't know if Hector's on here, but I see Hector on here quite a bit. It's great to see some of those folks coming back every week and are like, yes, queens, that. Because then we know we're hitting the mark. If our guests and people who are watching were like, no, I didn't quite hit it, then I know that we had something missing. But we got really lucky and had some great guests. So I wanted to know what y'all had impactful moments or impactful people.
Man, every show, honestly, I can pull something from, but when I went back, starting at the beginning with after Jess and I were on, then Draven was on, and that was a very impactful show for me. That was a very impactful connection to make, because he said things that spoke to my soul, right? He said things, he used terms that he didn't have to, like, he used them and I had never heard them before, but he didn't have to explain them really. I was like, that is the word that goes with this thing that I've been thinking about. Yes. Tell me more. One thing he said during his interview and during the pre-interview chat was about decolonizing your mind, right? Decolonizing yourself. And when he said it, I was like, I had never really thought about that, but yeah, that's exactly what I have tried to do on several instances to reject, harmful rhetoric, right? Harmful stereotypes, instead of accepting them and internalizing them, rejecting them. But I think after the show, I did some more research on that term and all that kind of can go along with it. So really, it goes a lot deeper than just rejecting negative or false narratives. It really has more to do with deconstructing the thoughts and the preferences and the values that derive from a colonial way of thinking. So consciously, I made a decision to work on this so I can challenge that rhetoric, which paints a person like me, a person of color, my thoughts, my very being as inferior, as lacking, as being wrong about the way power should be used, or wrong to talk about white supremacy and reject it. All those messages that I get that I am wrong, not just, my thoughts are wrong, my behavior is wrong, but I am wrong. So I want to reject that. It's not going to serve me or anyone else around me positively. And so I feel like concentrating on the fact that I and other people of color have always deserved to be viewed with respect, especially as to our agency, right? Our agency, that we can act independently with free will and not be beholden to those tenets of white supremacy. It was just, I'm so happy that I met him, especially at the beginning of this, because then as the shows went along, I was already on a journey of like self-improvement, and the more people I met and the more things they added to it, it just helped. Like it all went together. So.
We're going to kind of go around a few times, right? Okay, good. Because I'm like, I have a list. I do think that I took something away from every episode I was on. I think one of the things that kind of stood out for me, the conversations with Tenoch and Roberto, right? We talked a lot about kind of being within academia and deconstructing what we've taught and are teaching others to fill in those empty spaces where marginalized communities have been invisible. And so there were two very different kind of sets of approaches there, but both so valuable. And again, speaking as a person who is kind of in the role of an educator in a lot of ways, it was just really inspiring to me to kind of hear how each of these people had worked through it on their own, and how they were presenting the behavior, or how they were presenting the information, and deconstructing the behavior in light of everything that they had learned. And especially with kind of the unique sphere that we're in the SCA, how do we move out of the boxes that people often get stuck in, right? How do we talk about, being a person of color, or exploring what it means to be representing a persona that may or may not have some tension with aspects of what it means to be a person of color today, right? How do we represent potentially problematic things in a way that other people will understand and take something away from? So for me, that was a lot. So I want to thank them both for helping me better understand how to learn, and just the general epistemic take on being a person of color in the SCA.
One of the things that I appreciate with Seto was we started to talk a little bit about the idea of colorism, and what it's like to be biracial or lighter skinned person of color, and really get at some of the things that I've experienced my entire life, but not put words to very often. Because I'm the middle of a party. Hey, guess what it's like to be biracial? Like, you just don't have those opportunities. And the show really gave, I know, right? Awkward. The show really gave a moment to talk about what that's like, and how impactful colorism is on folks of color, and how fracturing. One of the things that Seto really maybe it was Adrian, I think it was Seto, talked about how people of color have to support people of color. We have to get behind each other, all as a group, because we're not going to succeed if we don't. And colorism has been one of those areas that has often torn apart communities of color. For those of you who are listening and haven't heard the term colorism, really what it's speaking to is the traditional value or worth of a person has often been tied to their skin and the color of their skin. But within communities of color, being lighter skinned person of color has often held a higher value, because you're better able to, in some ways, assimilate and look closer to the dominant culture. So much so that in some countries, this is valued so much that they sell skin bleaching. So this is not a phenomenon that like just a couple of us experience. This is not a phenomenon that's strictly to the US. This is a worldwide phenomenon about the lighter skinned you are, the more valued you are. And this does trace its roots long back to, if we're talking about the US looking at slavery, and people who were lighter skinned were able to work inside because they looked closer to dominant culture. There's a whole bunch of history there. I know Jessica wanted to speak to some of that too. But that was one thing that we hadn't really touched on that I'm glad we got to have some discussion around that topic.
Yeah, like I think this was a really good example of kind of being able to step out of basic concepts and into kind of your 301, 401 type classes, right? Mm-hmm. Because talking about not just the literal physical presentation, but proximity to whiteness in a variety of ways, right? In terms of language, in terms of hair, in terms of just general beauty standards, in terms of everything, right? And how different people of color, we had people who could be white passing in certain circumstances, speak to what it meant to be that, to embody that, and to deal with that. Because within communities of color, this is a point of division. There are differences in how you are treated. And it encompasses so many concepts, right? Like we've spoken, and Sabah has spoken too, about code switching, right? The difference between how we talk and when we feel comfortable enough to use things like regional slang or even fall back into more naturally occurring accents, because these things are viewed in negative lights, even if there's nothing negative about them. And really being able to break that down again with people from a variety of backgrounds, people who are professors, right? We've had people on the show with PhDs who can break this down very academically. We've got people who can break it down from a linguistics perspective, right? It's so important that people of color are able to discuss with one another the things within our community that, again, the colonial mindset and just generally being in a hegemonic structure that values whiteness. There's just so much to talk about, and there's so much for us to come to terms with one another. And there's so little opportunity for that in the community we have. So this was really big.
I hope this one will continue into 2022 because yes. I think you're right. This is the 301, 304, what have you. And colorism is just the tip of the iceberg, right? We haven't even touched on internalized depression and what that does to communities of color and how that perpetuates white supremacy and dominant culture. And, and again, right, this is the first time we've ever had space to talk about that. Space that is ours to talk about and not feel like we have to teach others. As y'all know, and viewers, we do try to teach you too, but this is a space that has been very very educational for me as well. The other thing was going back to some of what Adrian had talked about, was just the experiences of people who have been in the SCA for a long time. Amathula was another person that we had who they have been in the SCA for so long that they've really had an opportunity to experience all of the hardship that paved the path for where we are today. And I think that, we talk about honoring those who went before us. We had guests who went before and paved some of the way and made this a little easier for us to step in and take up the torch. And I hope that those who are watching and listening know that we are more than happy to pick up the torch and carry it forward. And you can rest, my friends, you can rest. So that was, I don't know if y'all had the same experience as Gigi.
I did want to say the end of your statement, you can rest. One of the more emotional parts of Adrian's interview was about his concern for the people who come after him, right? And I can only speak for my experience as a person of color, but there is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stock put into the idea that you are responsible for the people who come after you, that you can't only think about yourself. You have to think about what your actions or your inaction will do for the next Black woman who comes along, the next, fill in the blank with your, proximity to color. So when he got emotional, I felt it, not just because he was emotional, but because I know my whole life I've been told, you got to think about who's coming next. Are you going to hurt them by what you do? And it just touched me so much that he was honest about that in a way that was very visceral.
Mm-hmm.
And I want other people who are watching, who maybe you don't have people of color in your group, maybe you haven't heard this sentiment expressed before, but just know that we know people are watching us and we're thinking about those who are coming after us when we do things, especially when we don't do things. So when I hold my tongue when someone says something ridiculous, it's because I'm thinking about the next Black woman to come to that event, right? I don't want her to get painted with whatever brush I would be painted with after responding maybe harshly to something like that. And I think with all of our guests, we had people of African descent, we had Asian American, Pacific Islander, Indigenous people. I think all of them sometime during their interview did discuss their concern for others like them who came after them.
No, the legacy, he talked about what's my legacy going to be like? Am I going to walk away? That was the most impactful moment for me, was what are our children going to walk into? Who are we leaving them with? What are we leaving behind? Of course, I am a huge nerd for Hamilton. Like, have watched it I don't know how many times, but it's who will tell your story, and what is your story going to be? What are they going to say about you, right? We've talked about just in general being the person that people talk about in good light and wanting to be that person. This is similar, but it's a lot of pressure. And I know Jessica wanted to talk a little bit about this as well.
Oh, I just really want to kind of echo what y'all are saying. And also the perspective of, this is an incredible amount of emotional labor, right? And I think all of us have been at a place of exhaustion at some point or another. And sometimes it's as kind of simple as talking to the right people to recharge. I know I've reached out to both Nina and Gigi more than once to be like, y'all, please. But sometimes there is just this exhaustion when you look around at what's left to be done, right? And there is this kind of like, I can't do this work. I can't do it. And I don't want to leave it undone. And this was something that Sabah kind of talked about when he needed to step away, but then there was a tension there because he didn't want to step away and leave us or whoever, right? Recently, a very good friend kind of was that person for me when I was in a place where I'm like, I just can't, I'm done. And he sent me a quote by Rabbi Tarfon, and it was, "You are not obligated to complete the work of healing the world, but neither are you free to desist from it." Which, like, I don't know, it just very much spoke to me. It was a really, like, I should put that on my wall because for me, that is a quote that I've come back to a lot since I've heard it. And it just kind of helped get me through that tension of the incredible amounts of emotional labor coupled with the, I can't walk away. I can't leave this like this. Or even, hey, I can see that there's some kind of progress, even if it's overwhelming how much is left, but I can see that there's been progress. So yes, very, very emotional, very impactful.
I want to speak to that for a second. I love that quote. So we're going to have to talk later so I can write it down. I think it kind of goes along with my personal mantra of your bias is on you. It's not my responsibility to fix it, but I should do what I can, right? In case I can help enlighten you if you want to be, not force you, but if you want to know better, I want to help you do better. Oh, now I forgot what I was going to say because I stopped with that quote. But who is the rabbi again, Jessica?
Tarfon, Tarfon. I'll send it to you.
Okay. Oh wait, now I remember. I remember now. I was gonna say, like, when we talk about emotional labor, I am not joking. Emotional labor, like, I have lost sleep at night thinking about conversations that I've had about bias in the SCA, bias in other costuming spheres, wondering if I should have said something differently, or if I had only said it this way, then maybe I could have gotten through. I've literally had this watch tell me, your heart rate is spiking. You've been sedentary for over 10 minutes, but your heart rate is going over 100 beats per minute. That's scary. And I've had my friends and family say, why are you seriously going to risk your health? Like, why would you give all of this to these people? Leave them alone. Like, just cut them off. Like, you're worth more than that. Why are you, And I think part of it is what you guys are talking about and what some of our guests have said. I do care about those who come after me, and I don't want to leave things like this. If I can help one person not go through what I went through, it's worth it for me, even though it's hard to go through chest pains because your heart is palpitating. But that's the kind of stress that you're under when you're dealing with something as insidious as white supremacy, right? As patriarchy, as racial bias, microaggressions. They weigh on you, and I've seen it happen. I've seen that take its toll on Jessica. I've seen it take its toll on Nina. I've heard it, recounting of how heavy this is for every person of color that I've met in this society. So give us some grace. Sometimes we are going to be fed up for the day because it's a lot. And sometimes we do take on way too much and we think, oh, all of this rests on me saying the right thing right now. And I'm going to, it's unreasonable. And it's not sustainable. But sometimes we're going to have bad days because, that's a lot to ask of anyone. So allow us some grace for that, for the times we do get frustrated and maybe aren't as, well-spoken as we could have been. But this is heavy work.
No, I definitely agree in that. I came back from a vacation, and one of the episodes we talked about, it was Sabah. We talked about how we let our guards down and then, in essence, get punched in the gut. And I went on vacation and came back to work. And that was my first meeting on Monday morning, was I had let my guard down and punched in the gut by another person of color, a woman of color who's supposed to be doing the work and be an ally in advancing equity and inclusion. And, so it's not just the fact that we have to fight against supremacy. It's also the fact that we have to fight internally with the people who we hope and we feel like they should be allies, and they're not. And it's difficult. I think for me, that's been some of the most difficult journey, is the pushback and fighting between people of color. Because I want to shake people, be like, you are working against your own interest. Like, WTF, do you not see what you're doing? And sometimes that is the hardest part of the job, is facing, and I know that we all have the ideas of what is best for us, but equity is best for all. Inclusion is best for all. Diversity is best for all. If you're someone who's driven by stats, go look it up. Companies that are diverse, inclusive, retain employees. They recruit employees at a higher rate. The job satisfaction is increased with diversity. I mean, so many things. I'm not making this shit up. I'm not smart enough to make this shit up. I read it someplace and then just say I know what I'm talking about. But it's better for everyone. And so to then see other people of color not getting on board is probably the worst part of the job.
So I think also intersectionality, which we're going to go into more kind of next year. Sometimes it's incredibly hard to be a person of color. Like, I am a queer Black woman who is working within the DEI space, and the number of times I have been dismissed, disregarded, spoken over, told that the work I've done is meaningless, it's not enough, it's whatever, by other people who are themselves also working within the DEI space. I'm like, for dad? Like,
yeah.
Oh, it's inside the house. Like, it's amazing sometimes to kind of get that. And then also, again, to be a Black woman and see different folks who kind of will address a part of who I am, but not all of it, right? They'll work very hard to make sure that some part of a community I belong to is included and noted. And then when I'm like, but what about the rest? They're like, one thing at a time. Somebody's getting backburnered. I'm like, yo, like, and that's so hard. And I know we'll talk more about it. This is probably, again, moving into like 301, 401 type shit, but honestly, it's so frustrating to be out and to be doing the work, and then to see people who are themselves not doing much work beyond critique, quite honestly, be like, nothing's happening. I'm like, like, really, it's not enough to struggle against the vast majority of people. Now the people who are supposed to be supporting me are also like, I didn't like that.
Yeah. Folks, you got to know the enormity of the problems. Like, the SCA wasn't created in a day, and it's not going to have culture change in a day. Like, it's, what is that saying? You create a bad habit in 7 days, and it takes 7 years to break. I mean, like, this is that. It's not an overnight change. And I also want to note that the work that these two ladies do, a lot of it is behind the scenes. A lot of those fights to break down barriers, they don't happen on a public level, because part of it is bringing people alongside, we're not going to say, you know, we're going to air the dirty laundry for everybody to watch. We're going to do it in a way that brings people alongside. And part of that is doing it behind closed doors in a way that someone can hear you, because they get, you know, someone gets defensive if you're like, hey, that thing you did may have been XYZ. People are like, I'm not a bad person. I didn't do that. You know, that's like one of the automatic reactions. And to combat that, you have to do it. Sometimes you have to do it in a really soft manner, but it's behind closed doors. And so what you see from these ladies is like just an iota of what they actually do. I just want to make that known, because I do hear, not about YouTube, but just in general, like EDI is too slow. And I'm like, bitch, you have no clue. No clue. I do not want to hear this. You break systems by going too fast, right? Like shoving things down people's throats, not the way to build sustainable culture change. So I just want the audience to hear these ladies do way more than anyone can possibly comprehend.
I do also want to point out, so everyone here, right, we've all worked in DEI spaces in the SCA. And I think of all of the things that we've tried to do, I can't think of a single one I did not have to compromise on to some degree. There is no policy I've written, no change I've tried to enact, nothing that I got exactly the way I planned it. And that just kind of is how it is when you are working within this space. And I think that's something that I wish people knew more about, was the idea that like the compromises hurt us too. It is very difficult to know that the compromises you're making in favor of better leaves someone out. I can't tell you the number of times I have watched language be sanitized, and I know the impact that that will have. Like, I am absolutely aware, I see it too, and I know that there are people who this will now no longer serve. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes making the hard choice to serve as many people as you can and pave the way for perfect down the line in favor of better now. And that's hard. That is a hard thing to do. And I don't think people understand that. I think there's a lot of frustration when people see policies or letters or speeches or plans or whatever, and they're like, but it's not perfect. And I'm like, it was never going to be. Like, you don't understand the level of education and explanation and context that it takes to garner support for these things. And so to that end, I think that with the show and having people here speaking to so many different perspectives and so many different viewpoints, and occasionally perspectives and viewpoints that are not in sync with one another, right? That are utterly counter. There have been people on the show that have said things that I'm like, I don't agree with that. But we're not monolithic. And so there is no way to be universally right in this space. There is no complete, it's not black and white, it's just not. And so I wish that people really understood and could internalize that and look through that lens when they see the work that people are doing in this space, when they see the work that we've done in this space. I would hope that suggestions to be better would come before criticism, if that makes sense. And it doesn't, it's not always the case.
It is. I see the little successes, right? So when I started, you know, the time period and the geographical, what am I trying to say? Western Europe centric, right? When I started. And a theme that came from a lot of our guests was how persona development happened pre and post that decision to change the geographic range of the SCA. And it was interesting how many common themes we had. I mean, the personas of our guests varied immensely, but it's so interesting how the journeys almost overlapped and were so similar. My partner was asking me yesterday about how I came to my persona. And I was like, well, because when I started, Haiti, a Haitian persona was not an option. And so I settled for the closest thing, which was French. So I don't have a backstory. Like, I've never really cared to give my persona a backstory because it's not the persona that I wanted. But then to talk to all of these folks who are like, same, and now, you know, I'm digging, looking into this, and I'm looking into this, like, that happened in a very short time period. And people just went and were like, I'm embracing this. I'm embracing the chance to represent who I truly am. It really changed the face of the game for a lot of people of color. And we heard that time and time again on the show, which was really, really neat. I'm excited to see what's going to happen in these next years as people start to embrace their cultures and bring them into the game. You know, so when folks get down and feel frustrated with the lack of change, remember that even in this short, I've only been playing for like 6 years, even in this short time frame, like, there are changes that are happening. It just may not be as fast as you like, but those stories were inspirational to me because now I'm like, okay, I'm not now, but at some point wanting to have a Haitian persona when I have time. So I don't know. It was great. Any other moments for y'all?
I mean, I got a million, but I want to let Gigi talk.
No, but like, I'm hearing you talk about, and I'm like, that's the same one for me too. So you guys have talked about several other people that I also felt a kindredness with what they were saying or expressing. Especially if we can just backtrack to Roberto, because he talked about social science, right? As a sociologist, I'm like, yes. And he warmed my heart by connecting a lived experience with terminology, and giving power to these concepts by naming them in academic English terms, but giving them even more power by connecting them back to our intrinsic, like, organic interaction. And to me, that I was just like, yes, keep talking, like, just yes. So that was another person. And you guys talked, you know, a little bit about Tenoch and Seto and Amathula. And I mean, I could name an experience for every one of these people too. So go ahead, Jessica. Absolutely. Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. You're not leaving me out.
Kai was one that we hadn't gotten to yet. And I was looking at my list for coming up next year, and it's actually really sparse on people who identify as Asian American or Asian, either in persona or in personal demographics. And that's one group that I would like to start building some bridges to. We do have some folks who identify as Indigenous, which was one of the other cultures that doesn't get a lot of airtime. But I definitely appreciated Kai coming on the show and sharing his experience, their experience in being Asian American, especially when some of the questions from the audience came up about things like the different scribal hands that have been used for Asian calligraphy, and some of the more costumey versions of Asian personas. Thoughts on Gigi?
I was your co-host for that one, and I agree with your desire, because I also have the desire to connect with more people who identify as Asian American or Pacific Islander. I know they're out there, I can think of a couple that I know personally. So I will shoot them a message and say, hey, would you be interested in coming onto the show? Especially in light of the fact that over the past 2 years, there has been an uptick in hate crimes against that community. I went out of my way to make sure that people knew that I wasn't going to stand for any kind of disparaging talk, any kind of, phrases that I'm not going to repeat here that were being said by people in the public who wanted to blame a certain country for a virus. Like I wanted to make sure that people knew where I stood. So on my reenactors, I have an Instagram at Reenactors of Color, and I made sure to post as much as I could find about how in the past and how even around the time Asian American came into our lingo, it was due to a push that was supported by the Black Panthers, and that Black people in African American community were really supportive of the people in the Asian American community in mobilizing and protecting themselves. And we stood with them. And I wanted to do the same now. So having Kai on was important to me. So I was happy that I was the co-host there. And I got to learn a little bit about their experience. They live in a part of the nation that I'm not very familiar with the SCA in. And so, right. And so I not only learned about them, but also their experience in that part of the country. And please, if you are watching and you know of Asian American Pacific Islander SCA participants that you think might be interested in coming on, have them shoot us a message. We would love to talk with them.
I want to say that one of the really important things for me was getting kind of the generational knowledge, right? I am also pretty recently come to the SCA, especially in comparison to folks who measure their participation in decades. And I don't even have half a decade yet. And so talking to folks who have been here for years and years and years, talking to people like Amathula and Sabah, Adrian, who have really created the foundation that we all are on now, and hearing their stories, right? Because one of the very common, I don't want to say it's a dog whistle, but it's a dismissive thing that people bring up is the idea that like, oh, this PC-ness is new. There's only problems because people are seeing them where there never has been issues. And, if we weren't all talking about it on Facebook, or if we weren't all talking about it on social media or whatever, these things wouldn't exist. And then to have people of color come in and reinforce and validate, no, this has absolutely been an issue. We've been telling y'all for 40 years. It's been an issue. Like, here is all of these things that we have lived through. And here's why we're so frustrated now. That to me was super important. That to me really helped to validate the things I've been seeing, the entrenched behavior that we now have to address. And it just really helps to shut down some of that dialogue about how, I don't know, I guess we're perpetuating our own oppression by mentioning it. I don't know. It's we all knew it was gaslighting, but it was nice to have people here to be like, here are specific instances of times where we helped build the thing and then we're later dismissed, forgotten, insulted, overlooked, tokenized. I mean, it's just a lot.
And I think I want to just add that we really appreciate what the people who came before us had to go through, right? The people who have put in decades. My mother is visiting me, and she was just talking to me today about my health issues when I was younger, because I had a doctor's appointment today and I got a diagnosis. I was really happy to finally have an answer. And she was like, the things they asked me at the doctor's office were like, well, was your mother diagnosed with this? Like, did she have genetic testing? And I'm like, do you understand that access to care for people in my community may not be what you think? Like, and so I came home and I told her I have this diagnosis, and if you want to get, screened for this, maybe you should. And she goes, oh, I'll think about it. she's also kind of fed up with doctors because she's like, when you were a child, we had to sit in a different waiting room. Like we couldn't sit in a waiting room with white people. That's my mother. That was when I was a child in the 70s. So when I come to you and tell you that I have problems with the way things are going, and that they didn't just start with me, they you know, that I'm going to speak about these, I call them earlier discrepancies. That's a nice way to say it. When I speak about these, you know, in polite terms, I'm really doing you a favor, right? Because my mother couldn't sit in a waiting room with white people. Like, you could get a whole different Jatrice, right? Gigi. You could get the Gigi who's very angry about that and who wants to only talk about that. But I love the fact that the people who came before us had to deal with the people who wouldn't sit in the waiting room with white people, with people of color in the SCA, and they persevered. And because of them, I am able to come to the game and kind of stand on the foundation they built, and take things further and be there for the next people who come.
Listening to Sabah talk about his experience as a young kid with his mom heavy in the civil rights reminded me of all the people who came before. Amathula's stories about carpet armor, I know it's on a little lighter side, but the carpet armor and talking about whatever tubes that they use to hit each other with, right? Like, these folks went through some shit and came out on the other side. And it's really inspiring to know that those folks are still playing. I think Amathula said she wasn't playing as much, but that those folks are still working for the dream and still want the dream. I think that's the thing that folks really need to know and take away from the show, is that we all believe in the dream. Like, we continue to stay because of the communities that we've found and we've built. We're all a lot of socially awkward nerds and historians and whatever we want to call ourselves. We're the socially awkward but nice and welcoming people that they've stayed. And so there's something to stay for, but we can't do it alone. You know, again, going back to Sabah's piece, people are tired. We are tired. It is heavy, heavy stuff. You know, there were some days, you know, that I would have a really hard day at work and I would be in tears, and then I'd come and do the show, because it's important for folks to know that we will persevere. See, I can't talk. This is a glass and a half of wine, so I apologize, but you know, it's good times. That we're still here and we will continue to do the work, and no matter what happens, we will move forward. But many hands make the loads lighter, and part of the show is hoping to bring people in and engage people in these conversations in hopes that we're going to have the people that are coming behind us, that we're going to have the support from those we know and love that will carry us through this. Because again, you know, this show has been such a place to release and just be myself and get out of that code switching. But it's more than that. It's more than that. It's, we are building these stories and we are sharing these stories and being vulnerable in order to bring people along. And I think that's the thing that's been so fantastic about this show.
I have a super quick, funny behind the scenes, which
yes,
is almost
please.
Like a behind the scenes. There was one show, it doesn't matter which one it was, and I'm not going to say because it didn't make a difference in the actual show itself. But there was one show that we're leading up to it. I was just having the worst, the weekend sucked, the night before sucked, everything about that day. I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And I poked Gigi. I'm like, are you? And she's like, no, I can't. I was like, Nina, how you feeling? You were like, I need you guys to carry this tonight. I've had a bad day. And I'm like, we just, all of us, just battery on 2%, just cannot. And what's funny about it is, as much as I was literally sitting there I am not a terrifically introverted person, if you can't tell. I'm somewhat extroverted, but that moment of like, God, I hope this gets canceled. Please let this get canceled. Like everything in me is like, cancel it. Shit, we're doing it. God damn it. And then we started and it was fine. And it was actually really recharging to do, because once I was doing it and talking with our guests and whatnot, I'm like, oh yeah, like this is nice. This isn't a huge drain on me. Like this is something I actually enjoy. But man,
yeah,
like everything before, I was being so subtle. I was like,
I remember.
We're in a rush.
I remember that. And I was also, like you said, I was like, I don't even want to. But you're also right. When it started, I think, yeah,
it was fun.
It was like, fun. And I think that kind of also ties into just what we were talking about before. Like, people are pointing out the issues, right? So we can fix them. Not because we want to tear the organization down. Not because we want to trash it. We want it to remain. We want it to be better. We want it to be better. We want to honor the people who founded this organization in Berkeley at a party. I think they would love the fact that we want to honor them by saying, be better. Think about more people. How can we welcome more people to this party? How can we really include them and offer them equal access and opportunity at this party? I think they would love it. So we are pointing out the dirt so you can clean it up, not because we want to like talk about how dirty your house is. Like, and I think all of our guests kind of arrived at that by the end of our conversation together, even if they talked about some really challenging issues or experiences, they are pointing those things out so that people can be better.
Mm-hmm.
Can we touch on like recurrent themes at all?
Yes.
So
I was just thinking of that. Great segue.
So Nina's brought it up a bunch of times. I know that Gigi's spoken to it, and it's something that I think about frequently, right? Many of the things that we talk about are societal issues. They're not unique to the SCA. This is something that the SCA deals with a little bit more disproportionately because there is such a small community of color, and that would be tokenism. And not only have we talked about tokenism, we've had whole like dialogues outside of the show, and then we've come to the show and been like, let's unpack that. So like, I would love to hear from y'all about like how talking about that has been, how being able to like be real about that has been, and if any of our guests have brought up anything that you're like, yeah.
Sometimes saying how it is all that's needed.
Yeah.
Just to be like honest about how things are or how something is. And so the fact that that topic could be brought up and other people would could be like, yeah, I've experienced that. Yeah, it sucks. It was freeing a little bit because gaslighting, right? People had said things to me that made me think that couldn't possibly be happening to me. But I had this feeling that it was. So the fact that our guests came on various parts of the nation, various ethnic. So I'm also a cocktail in various ethnicity, various age groups, right? Various endeavors in the society, all touched on that particular topic one way or another. And that was a bit liberating, like, so I probably wasn't wrong. But again, not pointing it out so we could tear anything down. I was pointing it out so you could stop tokenizing me. Like, don't invite me to your table and then tell me to shut up about equity and inclusion. Like, don't, because that's what to talk about. But then when I bring it up, don't be like, why is she talking about race? Like, that's crazy, right? But that is exactly what happens. You get invited to a table of power to talk about things. And when you bring up, well, these things, others can sometimes be like, those things are not, that's not what's happening here. You can be here, but you can't talk about that. You can talk about other things. You can talk about fighting here or armor or, and I'm like, but you knew I was going to talk about equity and inclusion when I came here. It's just crazy. So validating. Our guests were very validating.
Even looking at one of the panels that I was on for LGBTQ and highlighting kind of the experience of the queer person in the SCA. You know, I was asked a little later towards the end, and, you know, I can't say whether or not I was the token person, but I was the only visible, and we talked about this as well, visible person of color. And it did feel tokenizing. And at the same time, I was like, so I just want to remind people that being queer and a person of color is a much different experience, right? So even so, at times it has provided an opportunity to bring up some of the experiences that people don't see, because, you know, they see us, they see race. And when we talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, that's often what people first go to. And but we're more than that. And Jessica, you were mentioning it before, being a queer Black woman, oftentimes I get talked to about being a person of color, and sometimes people will say some pretty shitty things about people being queer, and I'm like, yes, so let's talk about that here in a second. But being it's this hard place, because on the one hand, you don't want to feel like you're the token or have to speak for everyone who's a person of color or a Black queer female. And there are so few of us that sometimes we have to step in that role. And I'm not sure that there's a good way to get around it until we recruit more people. And I think that's good for the audience to know, is that we do this kind of dance of, yeah, I want to offer myself as a person to come talk to when you have these questions about being a POC and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my God, I'm not the only one, do some research, right? So it's it's the back and forth.
God. The number of times people have been like, you are Black. And I'm like, oh, this is how I find out what. Because I know that they're about to say something awful and then ask me to like absolve them of it. To the point where like a friend made this probably vaguely terrible joke about the idea that I was like the DEI confessional to some degree. Forgive me, Jessica, for I have been problematic. And I'm like, I cannot absolve you of any of this. You created these problems. You go fix it. Like, I can't be that person. And I can't speak with any credibility to an entire community. We're not monolithic. I will say things that even my closest friends will be like, oh, okay. Love that for you. Like, it's so frustrating. And then there's the constant, you know, well, how can we possibly still be problematic when we have XYZ? Or when people start, oh God, counting the people in marginalized groups for me. Oh my gosh, there is nothing more cringy than listening to someone start counting their friends, counting the POC in the kingdom, the number of times they're like, okay, well, there's so-and-so. Oh, and they're struggling. They're still on one hand. I'm like, count the white folks for me. How many hands is that?
Do you know them? Do you know them all, Jessica? You must know so-and-so.
Oh my God. So we've joked about that before too, because on the one hand, I'm like, how dare you think that I know someone just like because they're Black. But then like it'll be someone in like the Scadians of Color group, and I'm like, but yes, I do know that.
Well, it's like there's 5 of us, so of course we know each other, but don't assume that we do.
My extroverted ass. But I want to maintain the like, how very dare But yeah.
You want to be indignant, but yeah. And also another kind of dichotomous thing that I know I do is I tell you I can't speak for all Black women, but then I'll be like, Black women don't do that. But it's more of a joke. And so I'm saying it in a joking way, but the people I'm saying it to might not realize that, because people of color do that with each other. Like, oh, our group doesn't do that. Oh, yes, our group does. It's a joking thing. And I have to remember that not everyone is going to really take it as a joke. Some people are going to think, oh, Black women don't do that. And I'm just like, I don't know all Black women. Like, I have no idea whether they all do the same thing I do or not.
That was the beauty of the show. That was the beauty of the show, right? To be able to have those experiences and be like, oh shit, that happens to me too.
Yeah. Shared experience. But I mean, in the SCA, I know we kind of have, subcultures where people do the same thing. Oh, all right. Artisans are like this. If you're an ANS, this is how you are. If you're a fighter, this is how you are. If you're into service, this is how you are. And even, subcultures of subcultures, as if you're a cheesemaker, this is what you do. And if you're a woodworker, this is what you do. And if you are a rapier, I think it's funny that we can have that kind of rapport with each other. And so just if I say that to you in person, just know I'm joking, because I don't know every Black woman in the world. And I promise you they probably are not like me.
Don't tell them about the meetings. Which I'm joking.
We don't talk about Fight Club.
I have made this joke a million times, and at least once someone's like, "Are there?" And I'm like, "No." What? No. Where on earth?
Secret meeting, secret handshake.
I will neither confirm nor deny.
Well, and tokenism really does have the unfortunate effect of flattening out people, so that they are one-dimensional and they're there for one reason. And it stops us from being able to be whole-ass people who are joking sometimes and funny sometimes and sad sometimes and happy sometimes. Instead, we're just there in whatever capacity people have deemed us to be there in. Equity and inclusion is an umbrella, and there's a lot that goes into it. And it needs to be a part of everything that we do. And so it's so incredibly frustrating when people kind of silo it off. Oh, well, that's over there. And I'm like, no, it's everywhere. It is literally everywhere. You don't get to push it into a little corner. And it's ironic because it is itself very tokeny, right? Well, we have this person in the room, so we don't need to do any more. It's performative, it's dismissive. It is the hashtag Black Lives Matter while you simultaneously do nothing else. And yeah, it's something that I think we've come back to a lot over the course of the show. Just tokenism and how it affects us and how it's affected literally every single one of our guests. And it is, if I had to highlight one major concept for people in the SCA to realize is really magnified within the SCA, it would be the idea of tokenism and the ensuing erasure that happens when you engage with it.
Yeah. I've been watching the chat, and I want to also encourage our audience. If you watched and have a favorite moment or a favorite lesson that came up or something memorable for you, to put it in the chat so we can share that as well. I had opened that opportunity up prior to the show and didn't get any hits. So I wanted to just kind of open that. I did have, well, one of the things, actually, so Jessica just mentioned where I was going. One of the things that we always ended the show with was allyship. And it was really important to talk about how folks who are around us or who know us, are in the community, are willing to help, how people can actually help instead of just doing what they think is important. A lot of my favorite discussion has been about the word ally and what that means to different people. And I think the resounding answer has been, like, you're not an ally unless we tell you you're an ally. And being an ally is more than just saying you're an ally. the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist, that you're either an ally or you're, I don't know what the equivalent would be for ally, so I'm going to drop that because I was really trying to go there, but you're an active ally or you're a passive ally, right? And we want the active allies, the people who, one of the comments was the people who are going to be there when they start struggling because they are allies to us. Some thoughts on some of the ally conversations?
I will say that even as a person of color, I look for ways to embody that idea of allyship to other people. So when I see people who are struggling, who are in a bind, who are in a difficult situation, who are experiencing microaggressions or something, worse, I speak up. I say it's not okay. Even if I don't really know what to do, because sometimes socially awkward, right? But I want to do something, and I want to be active in helping them, because that's what I would want someone to do for someone else. I would want someone to do that for me. So I try to be that person. And I think if you are truly an ally, that is what you're going to do. You're going to speak up. You're going to act in some manner, even if it's, even if you are someone who isn't going to insert yourself into an actual conflict, like physically, right? Because that is outside your comfort zone. And I understand that, but just making sure that person is okay afterward, right? After it's diffused, going to get someone else to come help and insert themselves if needed. Like those are ways that you can comfortably do something instead of doing nothing. And so I think one of the threads that ties all of the conversations I've ever had about allyship together is that is an active thing that you are doing continuously. And it's not that you're only doing it for one group either. It's not that, oh, I'm an ally to POC, I'm an ally to Asian Americans, I'm an ally to Indigenous people, I'm an ally to female fighters, I'm an ally to, no. If you are really someone who wants to speak up and work against white supremacy and work against patriarchal structures, you're going to speak up for all the groups where the power dynamic is upside down and someone is being hurt or mistreated. That's my opinion. I am speaking for all Black women.
Of course.
Preach it.
I have three kind of things that we touched on throughout the season that stuck with me. The first one is the idea of giving people of color a platform, your platform, but not speaking over them or for them unless requested or unless they're not there or they're, we see that a lot. We kind of see people stand up and think that they're helping by speaking over us, by repeating our ideas without credit, it's not helpful. What you're doing is you're filling a space with your own voice, theoretically on our behalf, which means that we might never have our voices looked for ever, because someone else has already come forward and said this is what they want and this is what they need. And also, you if you yourself are not part of this group or even not part of the specific issue being talked about, you have no way of knowing if you've actually got it right, even if you're parroting it back. So that was really big, right? Being an ally means creating a platform for other people. Another thing that really stuck with me was something that Nina said, right? The dead man's test. I loved that. I think about that twice a week. I have shared that with people I know who are very interested in this kind of discourse, which I'm going to let her talk more about that in a sec. But it's just such a good way to talk about the difference between passivity and activism in terms of allyship, and that's great. And then what Nina just touched on, the idea that you have to be here when it's hard. You have to be here when it's hard for you. It's easy to be here when it's hard for me and go, yes, there, little brown girl. You can do it. I am here, back here, but here. You have to do it when it means being in front and other people are like giving you a little slice of what we get all of the time. And for so many people, you know, the going gets tough.
Right.
And it's hard. That hurts. I think that hurts more than anything. There's literally an MLK quote about it. Not one of the ones everyone likes to quote, but one of the ones everyone should know in Letters from Birmingham Jail, where he talks about how bewildering it is to see the silence of your allies. The people who said that they would be there for you, the people who said that they would support you, who are just kind of standing there watching you burn. That's hard. That's very hard, because at the end of the day, all I look at as I see that, and I'm like, I can no longer trust you to stand up on my behalf. But most of the time, this isn't a relationship I can just throw away. Now I have to teach you. Now I have to be okay with the fact that I thought I could depend on you and I can't, but I still need you. It's hard. It's just a very hard thing. Anyway, you should also talk about the dead man's test for everyone.
So yeah, I absolutely love the dead man's test. It was a mentor in the psychology department that I worked in once told me, any plan, anything to do with psychology and the work that you're doing in particular, where I was, has to pass the dead man's test. And what that means is, if a dead man, and I'm saying man, but you know, if a dead man can do it, it is not a behavior. So as an ally, if you are doing something and a dead man can do it, it means you're not being an ally. So that's really the difference between non-racist and anti-racist, is one is active, one is passive. And while that's great that you're not being a racist, it's not enough. It's not enough to say, I'm just not going to do these things. That doesn't help change culture, especially in the SCA. We can't turn a blind eye to all of the bigotry, I'm just going to call it out, the bigotry that we see. The transphobia has reached another level that is absolutely appalling. Like, we can't sit back and watch this happen and not do something. And again, you know, if you see something and you don't do something, you are an accomplice. It's the same type of principle. In order to be an ally, you have to be active. So yes, if a dead man can do it, it's not a behavior and it's not an allyship. We did have a question come up. Do you feel you've had to give anything up in order to do this work in the SCA or for this series or general DEI work? And do you regret having to lose it? Time. For me, so the series aside, because I think that's just the general, you know, putting it together and bringing people on. I mean, DEI work is a 24/7. And I don't think folks realize that. It's the, you know, going to the grocery store and seeing that they don't have wheelchair appropriate aisles, for instance. Like, your brain is constantly on and looking for those things in a way. Now, I'm not talking about actively looking for moments of racism that I might experience, but it's something that you develop a sense for, and your mind literally shifts. When I started getting into the DEI world much more intensely about 4 years ago, I started to notice things I hadn't even noticed before. And this is, you know, working with a diverse population. It really was a change in how I viewed the world and experienced the world. What do y'all think? I think time. So to answer the question, it was time that I lost, and I don't regret it.
I could relate to losing time, but because I retired early, it's like I have a lot of time to give. I will say that my friends and family sometimes think I should give less time to something that is as taxing as this. But yeah, for me, I think my personal answer is naivete, right? I do regret losing that. I tend to be optimistic. My friends call me a Pollyanna. I tend to think the best of other people. And I try to assume that they're working from a place of ignorance if they're doing something hurtful, until it happens like 4 or 5 times. And then I'm like, oh, don't really have another option and to think that you are willfully continuing this. So I'm a little melancholy about losing that naivete and kind of losing some blinders that I had on. I also tend to believe people when they talk about their lived experience. And I thought that other people would believe me, not only because I have been a Black woman for 44 years, and I've been a Black woman in the SCA for over 10, but also because I'm a subject matter expert and a social scientist who studied this and worked for the federal government, helping them understand these concepts and the pitfalls. So when I am talking about it, I am not just blowing smoke. I'm not making things up. I'm trying to help you. And the fact that I've had to let some people go because they just don't want to believe me, even though I would absolutely still believe them if they came to me and said, hey, this horrible thing happened to me and I want to vent about it. I would believe them because that's what I think you're supposed to do. So losing that naivete, having to kind of let people go, allow them to still interface with me if they need to, but putting up kind of a boundary, a soft boundary that what you're doing is toxic to me. Because when I speak, you not only don't believe me, but you tell other people that I'm also wrong. When all of the evidence points to maybe I have a point that you should explore. So that naivete, I think, was very hard to lose for me. And I'm sad about it.
I'm going to change my answer, but I want to hear what Jessica has to say first.
I'm going to get really emotional here, and I'm not going to but I am so not to be all Thanos about it, but everything I loved about the SCA at some point or another, I have watched be affected negatively by stepping into the role, by trying to be an educator to people. The show has not brought me any negativity. I think the idea of the work that I do in the SCA has really been the hardest thing. When I joined the SCA, I thought I had found a community that I fit in. And I think largely I have, right? I have found a second family. But watching kind of the same issues reappear, seeing those kind of reminders that we all get of you're different, you're other. And then stepping in to try to make it better and continuously being dismissed, continuously fighting against every part of the structure, right? At every level. I've gotten death threats. I've gotten insulted to my face. I've gotten messages and emails, and it's from everyone. It's from people who don't believe in the mission of DEI. It's from people who don't understand the mission of DEI. It's from people who think I'm not doing enough or I'm doing way too much. I'm moving too fast. I'm moving too slow. It's from people who told me that I could depend on them and then I couldn't. It is so difficult to watch everything you had faith in be pulled apart. This is absolutely the hardest thing I have ever done. And for free.
Volunteers. For free. Right.
It is so hard. And I don't even know, because I agree it's an enormous amount of time. And absolutely there's so many things I know now that I wish I didn't. But to be inundated with kind of the worst of communities and to see behind the scenes in so many different ways and then be so disillusioned over and over and over again and then still have to try to hold it together and make things better. I definitely have days where I'm I don't see it. I don't see it anymore. And I used to see nothing but it, and now I don't see it anymore. I don't know how I'm gonna come out at the other end. I have another year, and yeah, it's been a lot. I feel like I've given up a lot of who I was in the last 2 years.
I'm actually going to echo both of that. When I picked up DEI work for my mundane job and then picked up DEI work in the SCA, I lost the space that I used to keep where I could forget that the world was shitty. See, my dog agrees. Because I used to be able to go to work and it wasn't DEI focused. It was very mental health, behavioral health. And then, go about my own way. But it's the 24/7. It's the doing it for work, going and doing it for the SCA, and then living in the world that we live in. Like, I feel like I've become this queer Black woman who's on all the time, who feels pain all of the time. And that there is no space to heal. And I think that's why this show has become really important, is because this has become a space to heal. There are a lot of days where I may not be able to get out of bed because I'm like, things are so oppressive. Like, the world is just weighing me down. And I know that when I go to work, I'm going to hear horror stories about what people are experiencing. And then I'm going to, go to a meeting for the SCA and I'm going to hear these horror stories about what people are experiencing. And I'm going to turn on the news or open Facebook and see these horrible things. And so, doing this work, I've lost the ability to compartmentalize. And I think that's the thing that this show was meant to highlight also, is that it's not just who we are in the SCA. It's not just who we are in, outside of the gate when the guard comes off. This is 24/7. Like, being a person of color is a 24/7 job. Whether you're worried about the event being in a sundown town, which came up in some of the shows, whether you're worried about, the next rain and how they have a history of saying, homophobic or racist things in the past. I mean, it's a 24/7 job. And so going into the DEI work, I lost any ability to find safe space. But the show has brought it. So I do appreciate the ability to be in here. As we wind down, I wanted to just briefly talk about 2022. In 2022, we hope to introduce intersectionality. And what we mean by intersectionality is looking at people of color who also have struggles with another aspect of their identity. And so usually when we're talking about identities, we're talking about cultural identity, which could be boiled down to demographics. So I'm a queer Black woman. That's 3 different intersecting identities. And each time you look at an intersection, it brings a unique set of problems. So being a queer person or being a person of color is different than being a queer person of color. It's almost like being a minority within a minority. And so we want to start looking at some of those issues. And in January, we're actually going to start off our 2022 with intersectionality. We have Mai, who's going to come on and talk about neurodiversity and being a person of color. And Gigi, fabulous Gigi, is going to host. And really looking at the struggles from being a person of color and having these added, in some ways, barriers to life in general. We're going to be looking at being queer people of color, because that is one thing that hasn't really been highlighted. And we have others. If you're interested, please, get to us and let us know that you're interested. I think it's really important that we look at intersectionality because most of the shows haven't done that. And this is an opportunity to do so. We have some folks on the list. I'm not going to name everyone up because we're almost filled up to 2023. But we're going to take a pause and just talk about whether or not we want to do another year. I don't know. We'll talk about that. But we are almost filled up to 2022. And a lot of the folks who have been watching have contacted and said, I want to do this. So I'm really excited to see some of those people come on and share their stories as well. It's volunteer. They are literally putting themselves out for people to see, be vulnerable, just as we did. You know, it's an emotional thing to talk about the experiences that you have being a person of color. It's not easy, especially when, you know, for Gigi and Jessica being in these positions within the SCA and then balancing that with being the authentic self, like it takes some bravery and it takes some willingness to say, you know, being a person of color is the most important thing first. This comes first. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the guests that we're going to see in 2022. As I mentioned earlier, tech issues. If you are a tech savvy person and would like to help out, and or you are someone who is great at doing marketing, I would like to branch into some areas where we haven't been, specifically doing outreach to other areas of color around the known world. Because while I think it's great that we have so many viewers, I think that people want to see this and that we have an opportunity to grow the show, and not to grow the show because we want so many likes or followers. I don't even understand how that all works. But really reaching out to people to hear their experiences and share their experience and validate a lot of the work that's happening. My hope for 2022 is just that we continue to bring it. We provide this authentic space. I know it takes work oftentimes at the end of a really tiring day or right before a meeting that's going to be difficult. And I really appreciate you both sticking with it. Anything to add for the 2022?
I'm excited. I so appreciate this space, and you're right, it has been very healing. So super excited to talk to all our guests. And just kind of a reinforcement, anyone who sees this, who is a person of color who wants to talk on the show, to be a part of this, please do reach out. We want to hear from you. We want to give you an opportunity to share your experience with everyone.
And especially if you're, you know, interested in the intersectionality aspect, because even in these other communities, whether it's, you know, differently abled or queer or whatever other marginalized group you could be part of, once you add POC to it, it changes it. A lot of the affinity groups that you find on Facebook are mainly full of non-POCs, right? People of the global minority. Anyway, so they don't get that the fact that you are a person of color changes the experience and sometimes exacerbates negative consequences, right? Negative interactions with you. So we really want you to feel like you can come on and talk about those if you would like here, because we would love to learn. And honestly, I think some of us will be sharing some things that we haven't shared before about intersectionality.
Yes, intersectionality, it is not additive, it is multiplicative. It is there are not parts of us that you can excise and say, well, we've dealt with that, so you're good on that front. Nope. It's something different to be a Black woman than it is to be either Black or a woman, or even those two things put together. It is a whole different thing. So I think it'll be very interesting, the conversations that we're having in 2022. Very much looking forward to it.
Yeah. So whether you want to be on a show of intersectionality or you're interested in some of the later slots, which it looks like, August, September of 2022, we have some openings. Reach out to the page. There's all three of us are admins, and so we'll be able to coordinate. If you want to help with coordinating, like I'm all for that, coordinating some outreach and getting a further, not necessarily an audience, but letting people know that there's a safe space or safe-ish space or place where they can find some affinity space. That's really what I want. That's where I want to go. I'm excited to have some topics. I want to explore more of the colorism and internalized oppression. I definitely want to talk about, beyond intersectionality, yes, I want to talk about intersectionality more. And then hopefully we'll get more into kind of the next level of allyship talk, and talk about, for the SCA, what are some specific things like you can do today, tomorrow, in the next month, in the next year, to really bring this dream to life. And like Sabah had said at one point, that there's a promise that this game will be the best it can be for everyone, and it has yet to fulfill its promise. And so our job as the next generation, as the next generation's coming up, is to work on that promise and fulfill that promise for generations to come. I again want to thank my co-hosts. Thank you. Much, much, much love. And my partner, Lynn and Dawn, for helping get this underway. Thank you, all of the guests, for really bringing your story and sharing your story, being vulnerable and authentic in these places. Some of you I'm going to be reaching out to again, because we didn't finish and we have some more talk to do. But thank you. Thank you for taking the time. And for those who are watching, hopefully you got something of this. I know tonight we were just kind of chit-chatting, and that's kind of the space that we live in, is just authentic and see where it goes. But hopefully you were able to get something from the show. And if not this show, at least the episodes before, where we had guests, sharing. But I really appreciate that y'all continue to watch, because even if you don't watch every episode, please bring someone else in with you. Say, this is a thing to watch. You should watch this. You should hear what it's like from the mouths of people of color, talking about being people of color. Like, this is one of the few places you're going to get, maybe the only place, I don't know, where you're going to hear what it's like to be a person of color in authentic space. So please take this opportunity, watch an episode or two, and pass on the knowledge, share the experience that you have. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you January 4th with our first episode. Bye. Happy 2021. See you in 2022.